I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. On today's show, we're highlighting legislation introduced in the spring that would reshuffle the state's Geological Survey Office in New York's bureaucratic structure in order to make federal funds more readily available from the U.S. Geological Survey and other regional organizations. For more on this issue, we're joined in the studio by John Nadeau, Executive Director of the New York State Council of Professional Geologists. Well, John, I have to admit, prior to researching this legislation, I was completely ignorant of the New York State Geological Survey. So can you explain for listeners who may be equally ignorant what sort of mandate this bureau has and what their work consists of now?
Sure. I appreciate the time to come in and do this. The State Geologic Survey was one of the founding parts of the museum back in the 1800s. And since that period of time, they have been tasked with continuously mapping the state geology, and that goes into the resources of New York State within different regions and also looking at climate effects. These days they do mapping for climate changes based on the hurricanes that we've had recently, along with flooding, landslides, where we had the MTA and Amtrak tracks closed between Albany and New York back in 2023, 2024. They're looking at the causes of that, the changes in the climate, and how that's affecting those sort of things. They're also looking at mineral resources that go into things like the batteries, the critical minerals that are used for the green energy changes that we're seeing. So a lot of those sort of things, it's what they're mandated doing currently.
And I saw online on the New York State Museum website 3 research staff. Is that the entirety of this office, or are there people, sticking with the geology metaphor, like below the rock level or something?
They have 3 paid staff that are paid through the museum and the survey, and then they have various numbers of soft money employees that they'll bring in to work on specific projects that come with the funding, and when the funding's gone, they move on to other roles outside of the museum.
And what is it about the way the Bureau is structured right now that puts New York at a disadvantage when it comes to accessing federal dollars for geological purposes?
The funding that comes through the USGS and other federal agencies requires both the structure of the geologic survey and a title of either state geologist or a chief scientist to oversee the work that's being done, sign off the grants coming from the USGS and other federal agencies, which there currently is not in the setup that's there.
We don't have a state geologist?
We do not have a state geologist at this time.
Do we have a de facto state geologist, but they just don't have the title?
We have people that are doing the work of the state geologist without the title.
And this legislation, is this just about being responsive to those federal funding thresholds, or is there some other substantive impact that this legislation would have on the operation of the Geological Survey?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, you do have that influx of dollars. If the structure was there, you look at states like California, Delaware, Illinois, and other progressive states, they have dozens of employees that work for their surveys, not on the soft dollar federal funds projects. So New York is significantly smaller than states that are regionally smaller than we are, but along the same lines of looking at the future for critical minerals, the green energy type of thing. So there's that aspect of how do we continue to do all these things with such a small group of employees without a current structure to make sure that the work is done properly for the funding to continue.
Well, there's language in the bill that says the New York State Geological Survey shall maintain sufficient staff with geological expertise to effectively map, study, research, and curate to provide advisory services and remain knowledgeable on all aspects of the geology of New York State. So, based on that mandate, what would sufficient staff look like?
Well, I think it probably would depend on who you talk to. But, like I said, a lot of these other states that are the same realm of what we're looking to do to prepare us for the future have 20, plus people on staff. So even I think if we got to 10 to 15 people, it would benefit New York State and the future of New York State, both protection of the public, doing the work, like I said, looking at the landslides, predicting landslides, how we can find critical minerals. USGS is going back and looking at some of these previous mine sites, which we have a lot of in New York State, in the Adirondacks and outside of the Adirondacks, where we looked at garnet, things like that historically, where they're finding critical minerals in those waste piles. So we can clean up the sites while also, acquiring critical minerals from these waste areas that are currently there. But we would need to have staff to do that.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with John Nadeau, Executive Director of the New York State Council of Professional Geologists. Well, if the state was to make that investment in bringing additional geologists on staff as opposed to contracting out where they feel like it's needed, do you think that's the type of investment that might have positive benefits you were just talking about and might end up paying for themselves?
I believe so, and I think representing the profession of geology, the profession uses the maps that are created by the survey. Other departments within the state and some of the federal departments, USGS, Homeland Security, when it gets into the storm damage, things like that, they rely on a lot of these maps that are done by the Geologic Survey. So to not have that staff, we are putting ourselves at a disadvantage to make sure the public is protected in the future, I believe.
What if the state was to say, okay, I see there's a benefit, but XYZ businesses, they might use the work that our state employees are doing, so we're going to charge them a fee, and we're going to use that money to pay for them. Would something like that make sense, or do you think that this is something that should just come from our general coffers?
I think it's a combination of both, probably, because I think you have to have the staff to do it, and you can recoup some of your costs by selling products, which is done now. You can purchase manuals and reports that are written by the survey that happens now. But a lot of the maps are freely available so that everybody is protected. Like I said, that public protection thing comes in quite a bit.
I want to come back to the federal funds that might be available with this type of shuffle and the appointment of a state geologist. How much money are we talking about here that we're potentially leaving on the table right now?
The one program gives up to about $800,000 a year through the USGS. There's other programs, so I think it's well over $1 million a year in funds that are potentially we're going to begin losing out on by not having this structure.
Another element of this bill, over at the very end, says that the New York State Geological Survey shall not be authorized to enter any privately owned lands without the written consent of the landowner, blah, 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 blah. The New York State Geological Survey shall be authorized to enter into agreements with landowners to enter private lands on such terms as may be acceptable. What was the reason for including something like that? Is there some issue that is addressing? Or we send in geologists onto private land or something? What's going on?
I think it's always the, ask first before you step on somebody's private land, and, making sure that, I would say, the liability aspects of things. If you go on somebody's land and do something, cause an issue, if you didn't have permission, now the state's responsible for it. So I think it's there to protect both, the landowners that they may use, but also to protect the state.
What about opposition to this type of reshuffling? We mentioned that this is an agency in the State Museum. So how does, say, the State Education Department feel about this legislation? Have you gotten any feedback from those state stakeholders?
I think, again, it was introduced this year. We haven't gotten a lot of feedback, but within the museum, we've talked to people there. They are supportive of it. Within the education department itself, we haven't gotten much feedback to date.
And if the state does decide to follow this legislation and appoint a state geologist, what do you think are some of the criteria that we should be looking for in a state geologist?
I think you really want to be looking at somebody who, A, can manage staff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're going to have to be able to be responsible for everybody else within the department. They do a lot of grant writing, so there's going to be that need for critical skill of writing, technical writing, but also being able to communicate with people. That interaction with the federal government to deal with the USGS, all the interactions with there, but also to be able to deal with the public. This is a public-facing agency that goes out and tries to educate the public, educate schools, things like that. So that person's going to have to be able to wear those different hats in the process of this.
And finally, we've had in movies and TV shows a variety of celebrated paleontologists, archaeologists. I can't think of a geologist who's gotten real good play in like an action movie or TV drama. Do you think that's a mistake by Hollywood?
I mean, you go back to the Bruce Willis movie there, where they went up and blew up the asteroid.
Okay.
And that was the straight geologist there.
I think Steve Buscemi's character plays a geologist there.
Yeah, I think that was exactly it. But
and is he representative of the field more broadly?
No, I think he was probably a little on the outside.
Well, we've been speaking with John Nadeau. He is the executive director of the New York State Council of Professional Geologists. John, thank you so much for visiting us. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.